Adorno ticks all of these boxes. So he's very obsessed with the micro side, which on the whole Marxist theory, which loves grand architectures of theory and great spasms of language for its own sake, usually neglects. Marx himself, of course, was a combination. Capital is full of endless detail about the suffering of the poor in capitalist societies. One of the reasons many Western idealists were attracted to it in the early part of the 20th century. Because, of course, for every new development, there were many victims. Marx, if you read Capital, there's endless sections about crushed children and machines, people suffering in the early stages of industrialization. But the idea could almost be cobbit. And yet it's linked to the idea of an enormous theory that can transform the nature of reality. For human good? Well, the problem with all Marxist theory is it's counter-propositional in relation to what we are. What all races are, what humanity is and all mankind is as a whole. We're based on nature. We have our being in that substructure. We are not as leftist ideas would have us. One of the reasons for the extraordinary rapacity of communist terror is, I think, a sense of disappointment on a cosmic level. When you get into power, you realise that human beings are partly avaricious, partly sexual, partly acquisitive, partly territorial, partly communal, partly group identifying. Everything that your theory said that they weren't. And there's a strong element of concealed and not so concealed in the regime phase, misanthropy in communism, that if humanity can't be redeemed in that way, we'll fall on them anyway. It's almost a secularisation of the idea of sin. They've disappointed us, and so they'll suffer, and maybe through the infliction of various agonies, like Procruste's bed. The man lies on the bed, and his arms are over the side, and his feet's over the bottom, and you think, I've got to get him to fit the bed, so you cut off the feet, and you cut off the hands, and instead Pol Pot says, the leaders of the Derg, Mengistu in Ethiopia, says, look, our body fits the bed, but it's limbless. And that's how you've made it fit. Now, Adorno wrote a whole series of books, the most Negative Dialectics, Minima Moralia, Aesthetic Theory, which is an enormous book, this thick, 800 pages, it's in Routledge and Kegan-Paul. He was a pessimist, Adorno. All the photos used on the Routledge editions of his books show him with one hand over one side of his face, dwelling upon the pain and misery of humanity. He believed, in a strange way that has echoes of cultural conservatism to it, paradoxically, that the masses are totally brutalised and dehumanised by capitalist ideology. He believed that everything has been sucked into the spectacle of mass culture to such a degree that there's no freedom for the masses at all. Of course, he never thought, do they even want to be free? That's a question that is off limits, essentially. Everyone can be free, everyone can be rational, everyone can be equal. To say otherwise is to render yourself a beast and a demon, a reactionary, outside of the doctrine of progress and enlightenment. So remember that. His first book was called The Dialectic of Enlightenment, which he wrote with Horkheimer, and which is an interesting thesis because, like a true Marxist, he goes right back to the roots. And one of the paradoxes is that although liberalism's embraced a lot of soft Marxism, this is a ferocious critique of liberalism. The dialectic of Enlightenment is an attack on the Enlightenment. He ferociously lambasts these liberal theorists for their reactionary nature, their desire to exploit man in the name of capitalist progress, for their desire to dominate nature. Adorno believed that fascism was a natural reaction against capitalistic exploitation, and the desire liberals had to exploit man and nature. Adorno's so far to the left that liberals are the enemy. Never forget that for a true communist, the liberals are the scum and the middling ones who you will give enough latitude and you will give enough rope to before you hang them. I think Lenin, in one step forward, two steps back, says all these social democrats and so on, we allow them their time. We allow them the time on the stage to weaken the right, to weaken religious belief, to open the way for us. And when we're there, then we hang them. We hang them and we enjoy it because they're worse than the bourgeoisie. because they're traitors to the class in history, and we will deal with them with utter ruthlessness that we won't even treat reactionaries with. That's the real Leninism talking. But Adorno doesn't like that sort of talk at all. Because although he's not a humanist, he does believe in the Alsatia of forgotten possibilities. Don't forget, for a Western Marxist, and this theory is called Western Marxism or Euro-communism as it became, the Soviet experience has been a disaster. Privately, Marxist professors, I once had a conversation with E.J. Hobsbawm, who was the Marxist professor at Birkbeck, the extramural and evening college of London University. And he said in private, of course, when I was a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain, he said I would never have admitted this, but the entire Soviet experiment has been deleterious. 20 million dead, 50 million dead, multiple wars, dictatorship, it's been deleterious, as he reaches for another drink, He said all it achieved was the socialisation of the means of production. He said it's not enough, And yet, when the coup happened against Gorbachev, he supported the coupsters, he supported the coup d'etat for reasons of what he called revolutionary conservatism. You should hold what you have, even if it's totally broken, But Hobsbawm's interesting because Neil Kinnock was a close personal friend of his. And there's always been an interconnection, not between communism and elements of the Labour leadership, certainly in the Cold War period, but between Marxism and the Labour leadership and other leaders who are regarded as more liberal, more social democratic, more moderate. At the beginning of the 20th century, social democrat meant Marxist. By the end of the 20th century, there were people who were, allied with George Bush I and were Atlanticists. Dennis Healy, begins in the Communist Party youth wing, ends up a right-wing social democrat and an Atlanticist supporting the Vietnam War, something Wilson slightly intelligently kept us out of, but the Australians fought on our behalf. So there's a strange element to which Marxism is all right, at least when it's considered to be a theoretical add-on to centre-left disputes. Claire Short's a descendant now in the modern Labour Party and is advocating a hung parliament, even has left that whip in the House of Commons. But when the Soviet Union went down, she was asked, is communism dead, by some independent type journalist? And she said, communism may be dead. She probably went in the West, but Marxism isn't. And this idea that the theory can be obtained, retained, rebranded and recycled, even though the hardcore vanguard politics has gone down, is something that most of the left still believes. One of the reasons liberalism's triumphed in this society is the mental wetness, irresolve, fear and funk of conservatism, morally and intellectually and ideologically. And I don't just mean naked middle-class self-interest and sort of a slightly impoverished range of politics based around that, which is the core of all centre-right parties. What I mean is conservatism philosophically and intellectually. Unlike the moderate left that's always looked to the far left for its energy, for its theory, for its radicalism. They repudiate bits they don't like, particularly the harsher bits, but they come in, brother, come in, comrade. They take it into themselves. Conservatives, even of the Professor Roger Scruton and Maurice Cowling type, there is a permafrost between them and the far right and radical right ideas. This means theoretically and mentally they've cut part of their own body off. Whatever their much more moderate political views are, they will not take the energy which exists to one side of them. Always in thinking, which is one of the reasons intellectuals often make bad politicians, thinking goes to the margin of the prospect of a thought. Politics often has to deal with great masses of people, with what they can understand and appreciate, with short attention spans, with people who've got 100 other things to do. Politics is even in a society a minority sport amongst a minority sport. People who hate each other but are political often have more in common psychologically than the anonymous mass of people who don't give a damn how they're governed as long as there's bread on the plate the day after next. And because conservatism has cut itself off from racial biological, from elitist, from Nietzschean, from radical views, because they regard them almost in a satanic light, they couldn't fight back against liberalism because they had no mental ammunition. And because conservatism is an anti-intellectual attitude anyway, often philistine, often atheoretical, when a Marxist version of centre-leftism comes along, they increasingly laughed at it, scorned it, accepted it a bit. accepted it a bit, moved to the side, said they were against it, pushed away an egregious bit.